All right, hi everyone. I am Crystal Tulip and I work in human resources. Today we are going to be doing an employment update. There were a couple changes that took place in Colorado this past January and had an impact on some of the way we do things at Commerce City, and we just want to give you an update on those. First, I'm going to be covering the Equal Pay Act for Colorado. And then the second half of this, Jen Smith will be covering the sick leave within Commerce City for us to discuss as well. So thank you for joining us. I also want to mention, if you can mute yourselves, it looks like mostly everybody's muted right now, but this is meant to be conversational. So if you have questions that come up, feel free to unmute yourself. You can also use the chat box. I'll be checking that. So let me know if you have any questions, and you can certainly ask them as we go through. All right, so for the first part, as I mentioned, we're going to be covering the Equal Pay Act, and we'll be going through what the requirements are of this, and then discuss what changes took place for the city. There were a couple different areas: recruitment, reclassifications. We'll discuss interim assignments, evaluating pay, audits that human resources will be doing, and then resources available for employees and supervisors. So to begin, Senate Bill 19-085 is the Equal Pay Work Act, Equal Pay for Equal Work Act. It was passed in May of 2019 and went into effect January of 2021. Essentially what this is stating is it prohibits an employer in the state of Colorado from discriminating on the basis of sex, gender, or on the basis of sex in combination with another protected status by paying an employee of one sex a wage rate less than the rate paid to another employee of a different sex for substantially similar work. So some of the things that the Act prohibits regarding wages for new employees: we can no longer seek the wage rate history of a prospective employee or require disclosure of wage rate as a condition of employment. Again, not relying on that prior wage rate to determine a future wage rate that we would recommend for an applicant. We can no longer discriminate or retaliate against prospective employees for failing to provide this, and discharging, disciplining, discriminating against, or otherwise interfering with an employee for inquiring about, disclosing, or discussing the employee's wage rate. What the Act does permit, though, is for us to have these reasons to justify a wage differential. So a seniority-based system, a merit-based system, which the city has for our general employees. So essentially you're paid based on your performance. You get a merit increase. That's certainly justifiable to determine a rate between employees. A system that measures earning by a quantity or quality of products. So some industries, if you produce X amount of materials, you'll be paid a higher rate than somebody else. Geographic location, where the work is performed. So the state of Colorado is going to pay somebody likely higher than somebody in the state of Oklahoma. So geographic location, certainly a qualified reason. Education, training, or experience to the extent that they are reasonably related to the work. So that, again, when we're looking at applicants, what is their education experience that they bring to the position? Those are all qualified reasons to pay somebody a higher rate or a lesser rate. And then travel, if travel is a regular or necessary part of the employment, that's another qualified reason. So we're going to get into the specific changes that are occurring within the city based on the Equal Pay Act. We'll first touch base on recruitment. So we are updating all job descriptions and job postings. On each of our job postings, we'll now be posting the full range and offering a general description of benefits and compensation to all of the applicants. So this is something new to the city. Previously, we only posted the start to midpoint. So that would be our now hiring range. We are still going to be including that on our job postings, but it'll also show that full range and potential One thing that we will be doing is using supplemental questions just to make sure that candidates do understand what our hiring range is. Touching base on that earlier point that we have removed the prior wage rate, so we're no longer asking candidates when they apply for jobs what the current or previous pay history is. Continuing with recruitment, wait lists, we no longer are able to maintain those eligibility lists. So once a posting is closed, the department will need to reopen the job posting. So I'll use an example of, say that we have an accountant position that we recruited for, that was vacant, and we recruited for it. We filled that position. Now, a few months later, we have another accountant position that's vacant. We will now be doing a new job posting for that. And then maintaining records of job descriptions, wage rate history for each employee for the duration of their employment, plus 2 years after the end of their employment. This is all a part of our current retention policy, so we're just continuing to maintain those. Any questions so far on recruitment? Okay, I'm gonna go forward and touch base on reclassifications. So the regulations define a promotional opportunity as when an employer has or anticipates a vacancy in an existing or new position that could be considered a promotion for one or more employees in terms of compensation, benefits, status, duties, or access to further advancement. So the Act requires employers to announce all opportunities for promotion to employees on the same calendar day and prior to making a promotional decision. Employers must make reasonable efforts by providing notice by any methods accessible to employees in the workplace for those job postings. So to comply with what the city has done for filling vacant positions, the city at a minimum will post all vacant positions. So we're no longer able to promote employees into a vacant position without first posting internally. When we say internally, what that means is you can post it internally within the city, so you don't have to go out externally, but you can no longer do internal postings just to the department. It would be citywide. And again, for reclassifications, all of those will be posted again internally citywide, but we can use specific questions or screening questions to help drill down on what a candidate's experience as it pertains to the job is. Again, you want to make sure that they're job related questions, but we can certainly use those to help screen candidates. And then again, touching base kind of on those calendar days. So HR will be posting any of these jobs for a minimum of 5 business days. And those are available on the internet at the C3Gov jobs page. Sorry, it's a mouthful. Any questions on this?
I have a question.
Oh yeah.
Sorry about this, is Paula.
No worries.
So, and I apologize if I missed this. So on a reclassification on a position, so the way that this reads is that it can be, the reclassification can be posted internally. So how can I frame this? So can a division department make a decision to make it open for where it's both internal as well as external, or should it go internally first before we actually open it out to the externally?
They can certainly do it internally and externally.
Okay.
Any job posting. The thing with reclassifications is that you're taking a current position within your workforce and you're saying, okay, we've identified the need within the department to now make this such and such level position.
Right.
Typically what you're doing is that taking away another one. Previously, we were able to identify a specific person and say this person is being reclassified. We no longer can do that, so we have to open it up to all employees.
Right.
So, say, for example, you have an engineer and you want to make it an engineer level 2 position. You want to open that up to all employees with the intent that one of those employees is going to apply. You can certainly screen for things that are job related to say, here is what we're looking for. You could have somebody apply, internally. If you go externally, then that potentially means that somebody would be out of a position within the city. So that's something that we are going to be working very closely to make sure that we understand the intent within departments on this, so that, we're not making, creating issues for ourselves down the road, I guess.
Right. Okay. All right. Thank you.
Yeah, sure. Any other questions? Interim positions. So the city will continue to place employees in interim positions. However, going back to that last point, once we're ready to fill those positions, they will have to be posted and allow other employees the opportunity to express an interest and to, demonstrate why it is that they would be a good candidate for that position. Hiring managers still have the opportunity to decide who they want to go into a position, but it's allowing that opportunity to all employees. And then evaluating pay. So we'll no longer be using the current or prior pay history as a basis for recommending pay. HR will continue to make recommendations, and the review will include an additional layer of potential equity disparities beyond positions within their own department or division. So what that means is that essentially HR is going to be not only looking at similar positions as we have in the past, if you're a recreation coordinator, where are other recreation coordinators, and even looking within the department to see, are there any compression issues, but also looking city and county wide at people that have similar skills and abilities in education. Are we paying people in that, same level of abilities similarly? And then if departments do go outside of HR's recommendation, we'll continue doing those recommendations for hiring applicants. We'll want to know, why is that? Departments certainly are the subject matter experts when it comes to hiring their employees, and we want to know, why is it that you feel this person deserves more? You know more about your industry than we do. So we don't want to take that away from you, but we certainly, if we see a potential disparity, it's a lot easier for us to have that documentation up front than to go back 5 years later if there's an issue and say people aren't around to try and track that down. And then audits. So human resources is going to be conducting biannual, so twice a year pay audits and analyzing pay of employees just as a part of this act to make sure that there are no disparities. Again, we'll be reviewing positions based on similar skill, similar work, education, things like that. So it's not just based on position, it's going to be a multitude of things that we're looking at as we're doing those audits. Additionally, departments can certainly do their own audits, look at their compensation reports on their own. If they see anything or want to bring that to the attention or have questions, they can always reach out to human resources as well. And then the city has several resources that we have made available to employees and supervisors. So updated our compensation and classification guidelines. That's located on the compensation page on the intranet. And then we have trainings that we provide to employees on compensation or on recruiting, hiring, onboarding. This information will be updated in those presentations just to include further information. This is a new law, so things do change, and any information that we have. And then lastly, human resources is always available. So I mentioned it is a new law. There's a lot of questions that people have, and it's a work in progress as we go through this. So as you have questions, as departments want us to look at things, we're here. We're a resource for anybody as we go through that. Any other questions, comments?
Yeah, Krista, this is Cheryl. I was wondering, is this going to affect any hiring of like contract work for individuals that are coming in just to do, specific jobs and then they're done?
As far as contracts goes, it should be under our procurement policy. So I don't see that impacting it, but we can get that confirmation.
Okay, thanks.
Mm-hmm. All righty. So I am going to stop sharing my screen. And we have Jen Smith also here, and she's going to provide an update on some more changes that we have for everybody.
Good afternoon, everybody. Hang on just a second. Let me go ahead and see if I can get my technology, making sure everybody's seeing what they need to. So this afternoon, we'll go ahead and talk about our general leave policies and the compliance with the Colorado Healthy Family and Workplace Act. So today we'll go over what the overview of the act is and then changes as it pertains to the city's general leave policy. So really the city's general leave existing practice applies to all employees. So that includes both full-time and part-time staff that have been supplemented to comply with the Colorado Healthy Families and Workplace Act, so the HFWA. These supplements will be reflected in the city's revised leave policy and also included are additional components and subsections for the initial bank of general leave, as well as the designated paid sick leave in the public health emergency. All of those went into effect as of January 1st, 2021. Some of these key changes include new employees and variable hour employees. They're going to be accrued for what we call limited purpose leave. So to be used during the first 6 months of employment. Their accrual ratio is going to be for every 30 hours worked, you accrue up to 1 hour of paid sick leave. And for variable hour employees, that limited purpose is going to be solely for the purposes of sick pay. If they accrue up to 48 hours, you have a part-time staff employee that accrues up to 48 hours, they elect to go on a vacation, they cannot use that 48 hours or any part of that bank towards vacation leave. It has to be for paid sick leave purposes for the first 6 months of employment. If we have a full-time staff employee, again, within that probationary period, typically for career service individuals, those outside of the FOP, they're able to use up to 24 hours of general leave in advance during that probationary period. They're still able to do so. However, they do get sick or they need to quarantine due to COVID, since we're considered a public health emergencies as of now, still, they would have to use that 3 hours or the 3 days of general leave towards that quarantine period or towards their sick period time. Otherwise, they're more than happy to use that, more than welcome to still continue to use that if they have a pre-scheduled vacation or timeout that's outside of that sick period. If they do have to be out and it's COVID related and needs quarantining, if they need to be out, they're unable to work remotely. Right now, it's still 14 days for quarantine period. So it's still going to be 80 hours needed for their quarantine period. And if they only have 24 hours, that is going to be 16 hours that the city would have to supplement. So that would be applicable to anybody that's full-time staff within that probationary period. And then same for part-time employees. So if we have variable hour employees, they're still accruing 1 hour of sick time for every 30 hours worked. We have a new VHE, or we have an existing VHE for that matter, that needs to go out. They've tested positive for COVID. They need to be out for a period of time. We'll go ahead and the city will supplement the difference of what they've accrued versus what they need to use during this public health emergency, the difference. So an example is if I have an employee that normally works 20 hours a week, they are out for COVID, they have only accrued maybe 6 hours of paid sick leave. Therefore, the city would pay 34 or supplement their hours, the time that they need to be out, up to 34 hours. So we're going to count what their hours normally would have been scheduled to work. So if they normally work 40 hours a week, minus 6 hours, it's going to be 6 hours the city would supplement. For the beginning year 2021, a total of 48 hours is for each annual general leave bank will be designated as paid sick leave. So for existing staff that's full-time, we should have already been given our general leave at the end of December 2020. So for my example, if somebody has 152 hours of general leave in their bank, 48 hours of that general leave is designated as paid sick leave. That does not mean that it's required to be used only as paid sick leave. And so they're out that difference and only able to use 152 minus 48, 104 hours of vacation, not by any means. If you're confident that you're not going to get sick, you won't need to quarantine, or if you do have to quarantine, you have the flexibility to work remotely from home, so you won't have to use your general leave and be impacted in such a way, then by all means use the full 152 hours as vacation time, general leave time during that time. It's just that we have to use 48 of your hours and designate it in terms of designation usage as paid sick leave to comply with the law. Any questions so far? And feel free, as Krista had mentioned in her first presentation, I want this to be very conversational. So if you have questions that pop up or arise, please, take yourself off mute and ask those questions as you see fit. So moving on to key changes. So for those employees accruing paid sick leave, they're eligible to again accrue up to 48 hours of paid sick leave within a benefit year. Our benefit year happens to follow the same as a calendar year. So from January to February, the accrual is going to stay the same. So again, 1 hour of paid sick leave is accrued for every 30 hours worked. That's going to be applicable to both full-time and part-time staff. On the day the public health emergency is declared, as defined in the public sick leave law, the city will supplement all employees' leave banks to ensure full-time employees have 80 hours of leave available and part-time or VHE employees have the proportionate amount of time available. And again, leave hours were increased to reflect this current practice. And when we're talking about this, is back to my previous example, when we have a full-time staff that's within that probationary period, they need to be out during this period for quarantining. They only have 24 hours. The city is going to supplement that difference, assuming that they cannot work remotely from home to cover any of those differences, or with VHEs, because they haven't had the opportunity to accrue that 48 hours and we're still under that public health emergency, the city will supplement those hours. So all employees receive sick leave in compliance with the law. This is included in the employee's general leave. So there's only going to be one pot of general leave, because you can use it for dual purpose, for if you're sick or if you need a quarantine, as well as vacation time. There's not going to be separate pots. So you're going to see 152 or however many general leave hours that you were given at the end or beginning of 2021. You'll see that in your general leave pot. VHEs and new employees will now accrue sick leave starting January 1st, 2021. As a result, fewer budget impacts because full-time employees currently receive enough general leave to cover the required paid sick leave. And then changes to our general leave. So what makes this leave different than our current general leave? Designated sick leave does not have to be pre-scheduled or pre-approved. These are very important. So if you don't get anything from all the slides, please get this information from these slides. Documentation from the employee does not need to be required. However, the caveat to that is if you have an employee that's out for more than 4 consecutive days, that's when it's your role and responsibility as a supervisor is to require an additional doctor's note. What I would suggest is if you have an employee that calls in, they're on their 3rd day of being out sick, they're still not feeling better, please have a conversation with your staff, with your employee, and say, hey, I just wanted to make sure that this timeout is being used as designated sick leave or paid sick leave. And according to our policy, if you're out 4 consecutive days, then we are going to require a doctor's note for any continued days that you might need to be out. I would really hope that by the 3rd day, if the employee is not feeling well and hasn't gotten better, that they've already kind of had it in their mind that they're probably going to see their physician to make sure that there's nothing further underlying that's going on. So it's a good way just to kind of be proactive and just remind your staff, remind your employee of our policy. So again, 4 consecutive days requires additional documentation to be out for any additional time period to fall under our designated sick leave. And then absences. So if the employee chooses to use their designated sick leave, their 48 hours, absences cannot negatively impact their performance ratings. So this information cannot be reflected on their evaluations or reflected in their merit increase or their actual performance itself due to absences. Employees, however, one thing, still need to provide notice to their supervisors if they're not coming into work. They cannot do a no call, no show. So whatever way that you communicate with your staff, whether they are supposed to text you or send you an email or physically call you in, please communicate to all of your staff what your expectations are for this. Again, it doesn't have to be pre-scheduled or pre-approved. However, they still need to call in and notify you that they're not going to come in to work that day. One other thing to remember is with this paid sick leave, we cannot require employees to use it. So my suggestion, in order for us to be able to accurately report any kind of sick leave that is being used, is when you have a conversation with your employee, is to say, in order for me to code your timesheet appropriately, I want to make sure that the time that you're having out needs to be coded and used as paid sick leave. If the employee says yes, then we're coding it appropriately, and it's going to fall under that 48 hours of usage. And then what can this leave be used for? The employee has a mental or physical illness, injury, or health condition that needs a medical diagnosis, care, or treatment related to such injury or illness or condition, or needs to obtain preventative medical care, as well as the employee needs to care for a family member for the same mentioned above circumstances. And then the employee or family member has been the victim of domestic abuse, sexual assault, or harassment and needs to be absent from work for purposes related to such a crime, or a public health official has ordered the closure of the school or a place of care for the employee's child or the employee's place of business due to being under a public health emergency, necessitating the employee's absence from work. So again, if our public health emergencies continue to be extended and Governor Polis extends that out or tightens up the reins, and now we have to have school closures or daycare closures, this is where it would be subject to under the public health emergency. As of now, the public health emergency has been extended through April 15th of 2021. We'll notify you if that extension has been, pushed out a little bit further, but as of now, we're still declared a public health emergency through 4/15 of 21. And then one thing to remember is the employers provide up to 80 hours of public health emergency leave once during the entirety of the public health emergency. So this initial COVID health emergency was declared back in 2020. So no additional emergency paid leave is supplemented for the same public health emergency. So we're only required to supplement for one instance per public health entity or emergency, to be in compliance. And then who qualifies as a family member? So by definition, it's anyone by blood, marriage, civil union, adoption, child in locus parentis, or a person for whom the employee is responsible for arranging health or safety related care. And then for record keeping purposes, so what's the responsibility for the supervisor as well as the employee? Make sure that you code using one of these four, or you might have to use a combination if you're working with variable hour staff of the SIC codes. So for full-time employees within the probationary period, if they need to be out for sick time, you'll code it FTSICK for any time they need to use. For full-time staff after their 6-month probationary period, so the majority of our population is going to be GENSICK. And then for our variable hour staff, you'll use PTSICK. And then since we're still under public health emergency, any hours the city has to supplement for variable hour staff, you'll use EMER. One example that I will use, continue using general leave for leave not designated for sick leave. And then again, there won't be any separate leave banks. So this makes record keeping very important. What I would recommend is either have your admin staff or managers should have the proper abilities to be able to run what they call an accrual history report. And so you can run it off of the SIC codes and you can do that. I would suggest doing it quarterly. That way you can see with your staff how many employees have accrued variable or paid sick time and versus how many employees, both full-time and part-time employees, have used any designated paid sick leave. So that way you can have a running count and you just have an idea as far as the usage goes. It helps with scheduling purposes, and it also makes sure that we don't go past that 48-hour threshold for both full-time and part-time for using paid sick leave, the designation portion of it. Any questions so far? Okay. So differences for full and variable hour staff. So existing full-time, again, leave bank is given in a bank. 48 hours of the total banked general leave hours will be designated for paid sick leave. Again, if you don't feel that you're going to be sick or that you will be subject to quarantine periods because you have the flexibility to work remotely, then by all means use your 152 hours of general leave. For newly hired employees, again, the accrual ratio is 1 hour for every 30 hours worked, accruing up to a maximum of 48 hours. Still given in their prorated general leave bank upon successful completion of the probationary period. So once you've satisfied your probationary period, then any additional hours general leave hours will be given to you. If for any reason, based off your hire date, it's less than what the 48 hours is, the city will supplement that in the event that you need to be out due to quarantining if we're still under a public health emergency. And then for seasonal and VHEs, again, same accrual ratio. Every 30 hours worked, you earn 1 hour of paid sick leave, up to a maximum of 48 hours. And then our public health emergency is extended through April 15th. And then will I lose these hours? If you don't use the designated sick hours towards sick time, you can still use them as vacations. So this is applicable to full-time staff. So when we come to the end of this year, 2021, please use all of your general leave accordingly. So based off department director's discretion, some department directors will allow individuals to roll over any general leave hours. That's still going to apply here because you'll have physical hours that you have to use. And then of course, according to our city policy with the vesting with the cash out, if I'm an individual that has 152 hours of general leave that I earn each year, then according to our vesting policy, I'll be able to cash out up to 30 hours of my general leave. Please still go through all of that with your employees. Again, the 48 hours of designation or designated leave is how it's going to be designated. There's not physical hours. So I don't want anybody to think that they have 48 hours of physical sick leave hours that they can roll over to 2021 or 2022. That's not the case at all. Prior approval or notice does not need to be given to the supervisor for the 48 hours of your banked general leave to be used as designated sick leave hours. And then at the end of the year, you're still able to cash out any remaining general leave. You're still able to, per the city's cash out vesting schedule, that's applicable to full-time staff. So if any of these hours are used as designated sick leave, any remaining sick leave hours can be carried over into the following year with a maximum of 96 hours. That's applicable to full-time. And when we're saying carryover, in order for us to comply with the wording of a law, we need to use the word carryover. It doesn't necessarily have the same intent as our city's carryover policy application. Although you can carry over up to 96 hours of designated sick leave, you can only use up to a maximum of 48 hours per year. So again, it's just the semantics of the word of using designation. It's not physical hours. So again, that's why I want to stress, make sure you use your general leave accordingly, cash it out appropriately, roll it over if you're able to per department director's discretion, but make sure that you're using those hours. Those hours are not automatically going to be rolled over and carried over. Just a designation of those hours to comply with the law, but you'll still only end up with a maximum of 48 come 2022 to be used as designated paid sick leave. And then for variable hour employees, if an employee is to leave the city, those hours are forfeited. So it's not cashed out like a typical full-time employee with the general leave, with their general leave. So one thing to keep in mind, and also too with variable hour staff, if they're employed, once they separate from the city, it's 6 months or fewer. If they come back to the city, then any accrued general leave, or excuse me, any accrued paid sick leave that they've earned will be reinstated. If they're out longer than 6 months, then they'll have to go through the brand new accrual period. So any existing general leave, or excuse me, paid sick leave won't be reinstated upon rehire. So that concludes the general leave sick paid portion. Do we have any questions? Okay. Well, if you do have any questions, please feel free to reach out to me regarding any sick leave, general leave policy questions. And then with Krista, of course, for any compensation, Equal Pay Act questions. Again, wanted to thank you for your time and have a great rest of the day.